June 19, 1975. Oak Park, Illinois. Sam Giancana was dead. He had been shot in the basement of his home after years of living under federal scrutiny, political suspicion, and the shadow of the Chicago outfit. For decades, Giancana had been one of the most recognizable figures in American organized crime. But behind the public image was another man whose influence was quieter, older, and in some ways more durable. His name was Anthony Joseph Accardo. Accardo had been born in Chicago on April 28, 1906, to Sicilian immigrant parents. He entered the criminal world as a teenager and rose through the street gangs that fed recruits into Chicago's larger underworld. By the Prohibition era, he had become part of Al Capone's organization. His reputation for violence followed him, but so did another quality that would define his career: discipline. The public knew Capone. Later, it knew Giancana. Accardo preferred that other men occupy the headlines. That distinction became central to the way the Chicago outfit operated after Capone's imprisonment. The organization survived because it became less dependent on one spectacular boss. Its leadership became more collective, more insulated, and more focused on money. Gambling, loan sharking, extortion, vending machines, labor influence, and other rackets generated revenue across Chicago and beyond. Accardo was part of that transformation. In the 1940s, he became one of the outfit's senior leaders and worked closely with Paul Ricca. After Ricca's legal troubles and Accardo's own increasing authority, Accardo emerged as the organization's dominant figure. He was not simply a street enforcer anymore. He was involved in decisions affecting an extensive criminal network. His influence also extended outside Illinois. The outfit developed interests in Las Vegas and other parts of the country. Later federal investigations would document the organization's reach into gambling, loan sharking, extortion, and murder. But Accardo understood something that Capone had not. Visibility was dangerous. Capone had become a national celebrity. Newspapers followed him. Photographers followed him. Federal agencies built cases around him. His public profile made him easy to identify with the organization he controlled. Accardo adopted a different model. He rarely sought public attention. When called before congressional investigators, he invoked his constitutional rights rather than explaining his organization. His appearances before congressional investigators became part of the record of his refusal to discuss organized crime. Then came the federal tax case. In 1960, Accardo was convicted on charges involving false income tax returns. The sentence was 6 years in prison and a $15,000 fine. But the conviction did not end his career. In January 1962, the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals reversed the judgment because of prejudicial errors at trial. A retrial followed, and in October 1962, Accardo was acquitted. The case demonstrated the central problem investigators faced with him. They could identify him. They could follow him. They could put him on trial. But proving his control over the criminal organization was much harder. By the late 1950s, Accardo had moved away from daily street-level management. Sam Giancana became the public face of Chicago's outfit operations. Giancana was charismatic, aggressive, and far more comfortable around celebrities and politicians. Accardo's approach was different. He remained an important authority while keeping his distance from the spectacle. The arrangement worked for years. Yet the same secrecy that protected Accardo also created a historical problem. Much of what he actually ordered, approved, or knew remained hidden behind layers of intermediaries. Investigators often had intelligence pointing toward him without evidence strong enough to sustain a criminal prosecution. That pattern would continue through the 1960s and into the 1970s. Accardo survived changes in leadership, federal investigations, and internal violence. When Giancana was eventually forced out of Chicago and later lived in Mexico, Accardo remained a senior power in the outfit. By the early 1970s, after Paul Ricca's death, Accardo's authority was again central to the organization. Accardo's rise also has to be understood in the context of Chicago's political and economic environment. Prohibition had created an enormous illegal market, and the end of Prohibition did not destroy the criminal infrastructure that had been built around it. The outfit shifted toward gambling and other businesses that could generate steady income without requiring the same public violence associated with the bootlegging wars. That transition was important. The Chicago organization became less like a street gang and more like a criminal corporation. Different crews controlled different territories and activities. Senior figures could coordinate policy, while lower-ranking members handled collections, gambling operations, loans, and violence. The structure created layers between decision-makers and offenders. Accardo's personal style fit that environment. He was not unknown to federal agents. The FBI tracked him for years, and organized crime investigators considered him a major figure. But surveillance and suspicion were not enough. To convict a leader, prosecutors needed evidence connecting him directly to a specific crime. That was especially difficult when the organization used intermediaries. The contrast with Capone was striking. Capone had been convicted of tax offenses after the government failed to secure a conviction against him for more serious crimes. Accardo faced a similar federal strategy decades later. The government attacked his finances rather than trying to prove every act attributed to the outfit. Even that strategy produced only a temporary result. His 1960 conviction was overturned, and the retrial ended in acquittal. The outcome reinforced the separation between reputation and courtroom proof that would follow Accardo for the rest of his life. The federal government could describe him as powerful. The courts still required evidence, and Accardo understood the difference. Then Giancana returned to the Chicago area, and on a June night in 1975, the former outfit boss was murdered. For decades, the identity of his killer remained officially unresolved. At the time, investigators considered multiple possibilities. Giancana had enemies. He had spent years involved in organized crime and had attracted federal attention. He also had a complicated history with powerful people inside and outside the underworld. Accardo was never prosecuted for the killing, but the unanswered question would survive him. What happened inside that basement? Who had authorized the murder? And had the most secretive boss in Chicago personally taken part? In 1975, there was no public answer. For Tony Accardo, the system of silence was still working. His name remained associated with power, but not with a courtroom conviction for murder. The distinction mattered, because the man who had spent decades avoiding the spotlight was about to leave behind one of the most persistent unanswered questions in the history of the Chicago outfit. After Sam Giancana was killed in 1975, Tony Accardo's position inside the Chicago outfit became even more important. He had already spent decades adapting to the changing structure of organized crime. The old Capone era had disappeared. The flamboyant bosses were replaced by administrators who understood that organized crime could survive only if it remained difficult to see. Accardo's influence was built around that principle. The outfit was not simply a collection of independent criminals. Federal investigators described it as an organized criminal enterprise with crews operating in different territories. Its activities included gambling, loan sharking, extortion, and murder. Money moved through legitimate businesses and illegal operations. The structure was designed to create distance between senior leadership and the people committing crimes on the street. That distance became crucial in the late 1970s. In January 1978, Accardo and his wife were away in California when their River Forest residence was burglarized. The federal court record later established that the break-in occurred while the couple was away and that Michael Volpe, a man who worked for Accardo as a handyman, discovered the forced entry. The burglary itself became the beginning of a much larger investigation. Soon afterward, known burglars began turning up dead around the Chicago area. Their deaths were not officially tied to Accardo by a criminal conviction, but federal prosecutors would later present evidence connecting a series of killings to retaliation for the burglary. The case became one of the most revealing episodes in the history of the outfit. Years later, Nicholas Calabrese, a former outfit member, cooperated with federal investigators. His testimony and other evidence helped prosecutors reconstruct murders that had remained unsolved for decades. The investigation became known as Operation Family Secrets. The FBI described the investigation as a 7-year effort that began after a letter from Frank Calabrese Jr. in 1998. He agreed to wear a recording device while speaking with his father about the criminal organization. Those recordings produced information about murders and other outfit activities. Investigators did not simply accept the recordings. They corroborated them. Agents examined old police reports, financial records, property documents, gambling receipts, surveillance information, and statements from cooperating witnesses. The evidence was presented to a federal grand jury in 2005. The resulting indictment named 14 defendants and charged 18 previously unsolved murders. Accardo himself was not among those defendants. He had been dead for more than a decade. But the evidence developed through family secrets helped establish a documented picture of the organization he had helped lead. One of the cases involved the 1978 killings connected to the burglary of Accardo's home. Federal prosecutors alleged that outfit members sought to identify the burglars responsible and punish them. Nicholas Calabrese later testified about his own participation in one of the killings. The case also demonstrated something important about Accardo's method of power. His name did not need to appear in every transaction. The organization could act through crews. Crew leaders could direct soldiers. Soldiers could carry out violence. And senior leadership could remain separated from the crime scene. That same separation had protected Accardo during earlier investigations. In 1978, another event brought federal agents directly into his home. Michael Volpe, the Accardo employee who had discovered the burglary, testified before a federal grand jury. In October of that year, Volpe disappeared. His disappearance intensified federal scrutiny. In November, the FBI executed a search warrant at Accardo's River Forest residence. The search became significant because agents found evidence connected to the wider investigation, including a large amount of cash stored in a vault. The government later fought over possession of the money, and the Seventh Circuit addressed the search and seizure in federal court. The raid did not lead to a criminal conviction against Accardo. Again, investigators had reached his property. Again, they had uncovered information. Again, the central figure remained beyond a murder prosecution. That pattern helps explain why Accardo's reputation became so unusual. He was repeatedly identified by law enforcement as a major organized crime figure. He appeared in congressional investigations. He faced federal tax charges. His residence became the subject of a federal search. His organization was later linked through cooperating witnesses to a large number of murders. Yet Accardo died without being convicted of a felony for the criminal leadership that investigators attributed to him. The search also became important in another way. A federal appeals court later reviewed the government's seizure of property from the residence. The case established a documented legal record of the raid and the dispute over property taken from the home. For investigators, the larger significance was not simply the cash. It was the concentration of suspicious evidence around the residence of a man already regarded as one of the most powerful figures in organized crime. The burglary itself had also exposed a weakness in the outfit system. Violence could conceal information, but it could not guarantee silence forever. Every killing created witnesses, suspects, records, and eventually a trail for investigators to follow. The victims connected to the burglary became part of that trail. Federal prosecutors later argued that the murders were retaliation for the theft from Accardo's home. The evidence presented years afterward did not depend on a single informant. It was assembled from multiple sources and checked against older records. That process mattered because organized crime cases often collapse when testimony cannot be corroborated. Family Secrets was built around corroboration. The FBI's account specifically describes agents checking information from wiretaps, surveillance, cooperating witnesses, police reports, financial statements, property records, and gambling receipts. The investigation required years because investigators were reconstructing events that had happened long before the case reached court. By the time the indictment was returned in 2005, Accardo had been dead for 13 years. The organization had moved into another generation, but the evidence was still alive. The federal case eventually produced convictions against major outfit figures. More than 125 witnesses testified, and prosecutors presented more than 200 pieces of evidence. The FBI described the investigation as an exceptional organized crime case because of the cooperation and detailed information it generated. Accardo died on May 22, 1992, in Chicago, at the age of 86. For years, that seemed to be the end of the story. The official record contained the investigations. The court files contained the evidence. The witnesses had described the outfit structure. But one question remained. Who killed Sam Giancana? For decades, the answer stayed in the territory between intelligence and proof. There were theories, there were informants, there were law enforcement suspicions, but there was no prosecution of Accardo for Giancana's murder. Then, more than 30 years after Accardo's death, a new piece of evidence surfaced. And this time, the source was not a rumor from Chicago's Underworld. It was an FBI interview report. The revelation came decades after the murder. In 2025, NBC Chicago reported on a newly obtained FBI interview report involving Nicholas Calabrese, the former outfit hitman whose cooperation had already helped federal investigators solve numerous Chicago mob killings. According to that FBI report, Calabrese identified Tony Accardo as being involved in the homicide of Sam Giancana. The distinction is critical. This was not a courtroom verdict. It was not an indictment against Accardo. It was not a criminal conviction. Accardo had been dead since 1992. But the report represented something different from the speculation that had surrounded Giancana's death for half a century. It placed an allegation of direct involvement inside a documented federal investigative record. That changed the historical picture. Giancana was killed on June 19, 1975, in the basement of his Oak Park home. The murder occurred after years of conflict, federal attention, and instability surrounding the former Chicago outfit boss. Accardo had the stature to authorize violence at the highest level of the organization. Federal investigators and organized crime experts had long suspected that Giancana's death could not have occurred without approval from senior outfit leadership. The newly reported FBI material went further by identifying Accardo himself as involved. Yet the record still has limits. There was no trial. There was no opportunity for Accardo to respond. There was no prosecution. The man named in the report was already beyond the reach of the courts. The FBI report gives investigators a significant account. The historical record establishes that Accardo possessed the authority to influence outfit violence. Giancana was murdered in 1975. Accardo was never prosecuted for that killing. Those facts can exist together without pretending an allegation is the same as a conviction. That distinction is essential because Accardo's career was built in the space between suspicion and proof. His real legacy was built over decades. He had entered Chicago's criminal world during the Prohibition era. He survived the collapse of Capone's empire. He became a senior outfit leader. He helped move the organization toward gambling and other profitable rackets. He worked within a leadership structure that placed enormous value on secrecy and insulation. The outfit expanded beyond Chicago. Las Vegas became one of its most important external territories. Later investigations into casino skimming would send senior outfit figures to prison, including Joseph Iuppa and other leaders. Federal investigators believed money from the operation ultimately benefited higher leadership, but they were unable to prove Accardo's personal criminal responsibility in court. Again, the pattern was visible. The organization could be prosecuted. Its soldiers could be convicted. Its leaders could be identified. But Tony Accardo remained difficult to reach. That changed in historical terms after Operation Family Secrets. The federal case produced convictions against major outfit figures, including Frank Calabrese Sr., James Marcello, Joseph Lombardo, Paul Shiro, and Anthony Doyle. The FBI described the investigation as one of its most successful organized crime cases. More than 125 witnesses testified at trial, and prosecutors presented more than 200 pieces of evidence. The case did not prosecute Accardo. Instead, it exposed the machinery that had operated beneath his generation of leadership. The evidence showed how information could remain buried for decades until someone inside the organization decided to cooperate. That is the meaning of the title Secret. It was not a hidden room or a single document. It was knowledge about who had power, who gave orders, and who could be trusted to carry out the most dangerous assignments. For years, Accardo's survival depended on that knowledge remaining fragmented. One man knew a meeting, another knew a killing, another knew where money moved, another knew who had approved an order. The federal government eventually began connecting those pieces. The Family Secrets investigation demonstrated the method. Recordings were compared with surveillance. Witness statements were checked against old police files. Financial records and property documents were examined. Years of apparently disconnected crimes were reconstructed into a coherent organizational history. That process also changed how the public understood Accardo. He was no longer simply the quiet successor to Capone. He became a central figure in a criminal system whose violence could remain hidden for generations. And the Giancana evidence added another layer. If the FBI report is accepted as a record of Calabrese's account, then one of the most enduring mysteries in Chicago organized crime points back toward the man who had spent his life avoiding direct exposure. But even now, caution is necessary. History is not the same thing as rumor. A federal interview report records what an informant told investigators. It does not automatically establish guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. That standard belonged to a courtroom that never took place. Tony Accardo died of natural causes in 1992. He was buried at Queen of Heaven Cemetery in Hillside, Illinois. The Chicago outfit survived him. Its leadership changed. Its influence declined under federal pressure. Major investigations, prosecutions, and cooperating witnesses exposed structures that had once seemed almost impossible to penetrate. But the organization did not disappear overnight. What disappeared was something more difficult to measure: the belief that a boss could remain permanently beyond the reach of history. Accardo had spent decades building distance between himself and the crimes associated with his organization. He avoided public explanations. He avoided criminal convictions for the killings attributed to his era. He kept his name away from many of the most visible operations. Yet records accumulated. Court decisions remained. Grand jury investigations remained. FBI files remained. Witness testimony remained. And decades later, another federal record reopened the question of Sam Giancana's death. That is the darker lesson of Tony Accardo's career. Organized crime does not depend only on guns, money, or fear. It depends on silence. For years, silence protected the men at the top. But silence is not the same as erasure. Eventually, witnesses speak. Files are released. Investigators compare old evidence with new testimony. And when the pieces finally connect, the most carefully protected secret can become the one thing a criminal organization can no longer control: the historical record.